The quiet. Before the storm captain. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the defense station orbiting Aurora Prime, watching the morning sun cast golden light across the colony below. The sight never failed to fill her with quiet pride. Neat rows of agricultural domes stretched across the fertile valleys, while the central city sparkled like a jewel against the green landscape. Cargo ships moved in orderly patterns, carrying the colony's famous grain to neighboring systems. After 12 years of peaceful service, Sarah had grown to love the routine of colonial defense. Dr. Marcus Webb finished his morning rounds through Aurora Prime's research facility, checking on the latest agricultural experiments. The hydroponic labs were producing record yields, and the new soil enhancement project was showing remarkable results. Marcus had dedicated his life to making barren worlds bloom, and Aurora Prime was his masterpiece. 60,000 people now called this place home, and they were entirely self-sufficient. The colony even exported food to less fortunate worlds in the sector. Elena Rodriguez walked through her vast wheat fields, feeling the grain stalks rustle against her hands. The harvest season was approaching, and this year would be their best yet. Her family had been among the first settlers 15 years ago, when Aurora Prime was nothing but empty plains and distant dreams. Now her children attended the finest schools in the sector, and her grain-fed families across dozen worlds. She could see her neighbors working their own fields, hear the distant laughter of children playing near the irrigation canals. The morning briefing at the defense station was routine as always. Sarah reviewed the overnight reports while sipping her coffee. 3 cargo ships had departed for the core worlds, 2 supply vessels had arrived from Earth, and the automated patrol drones had detected nothing unusual in the outer system. The most exciting event was a minor technical malfunction in the weather satellite, which the maintenance crew had already fixed. Similar peaceful scenes played out on Titan's Rest and New Horizon, humanity's other 2 colonies in the sector. Titan's Rest specialized in mining rare metals from asteroid belts, while New Horizon focused on manufacturing and research. Together, the 3 colonies formed the heart of human presence in the Outer Rim. They traded with alien civilizations, hosted diplomatic missions, and served as beacons of human culture in the galactic community. Their combined population of nearly 200,000 represented humanity's greatest achievement in interstellar colonization. Across the galaxy, in the marble halls of the Korthak Empire's capital world, General Vextar studied holographic displays showing human expansion patterns. The data was troubling. In just 50 years, humans had established 47 colonies across 16 sectors. Their population growth was exponential, their technology advancing rapidly, and their influence spreading throughout the galaxy. What had started as a minor curiosity was becoming a significant concern. Ambassador Zine entered the war room, his scaled features showing obvious displeasure. He had just returned from diplomatic talks with human representatives, and the meetings had not gone as expected. The humans were polite but firm in their expansion plans. They claimed empty worlds, developed them efficiently, and seemed genuinely puzzled when other species expressed concern about their rapid growth. They appeared to view their expansion as a natural right rather than a potential threat. The Korthak Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. They had dealt with dozens of emerging species, and the solution was always the same: a display of superior force, a demonstration of consequences, and the newcomers would learn their place in the galactic order. The humans would be no different. General Vextar selected 3 targets from the holographic map: Aurora Prime, Titan's Rest, and New Horizon. They were far from Earth, lightly defended, and would serve as perfect examples. Emperor Thexhan approved the military action with casual indifference. The humans were farmers and merchants, not warriors. They had no significant military presence in the outer colonies, and their defense fleets were primarily equipped for patrol duties rather than serious combat. A quick strike would eliminate the 3 colonies, demonstrate Korthak superiority, and force humanity to retreat to their core worlds. The operation would be swift, decisive, and educational. The Korthak battle fleet assembled in the dark space between star systems. 47 warships, each capable of destroying a small moon, moved through hyperspace toward their targets. Their weapons had been tested against fortified military installations and proven devastatingly effective. The human colonies would have no defense against such overwhelming force. The fleet would arrive simultaneously at all three locations, eliminate all resistance, and complete their mission within hours. Sarah Chen was reviewing duty rosters when her sensor officer called out an urgent warning. Multiple contacts were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, moving in perfect formation toward Aurora Prime. The signatures were massive, clearly military vessels, and they were not responding to communication attempts. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized what was happening. After 12 years of peace, war had finally come to their quiet corner of the galaxy. The evacuation alarm began sounding across Aurora Prime as Sarah's urgent warnings reached the colony. But there was nowhere to run. The civilian transports could not outrun military vessels, and the underground shelters had never been designed to withstand orbital bombardment. Families hugged each other in their homes, teachers gathered their students in classrooms, and workers stood helplessly in the fields as death approached from the sky. Marcus Webb tried to coordinate the evacuation efforts, but he knew it was hopeless. The Korthak fleet was already in orbit, weapons powered and targeting systems active. He sent out desperate pleas on all frequencies, asking for mercy, offering surrender, explaining that Aurora Prime was a peaceful agricultural colony with no military value. The aliens did not respond. They simply opened fire. The bombardment began at dawn. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning the research facility into molten slag. The agricultural domes collapsed in brilliant explosions, destroying years of careful work in seconds. The central city disappeared in a series of detonations that could be seen from space. Elena Rodriguez held her children close as the ground shook beneath their feet, whispering prayers that would never be answered. Sarah Chen fought back with everything she had. Her 3 patrol ships engaged the Korthak fleet in a hopeless battle, their light weapons barely scratching the enemy shields. The defense station's guns fired continuously, but they were designed to destroy asteroids, not warships. One by one, her ships were destroyed, their crews dying in brilliant explosions that lit up the sky. Sarah's final act was to ram her damaged patrol ship into a Korthak destroyer, achieving nothing but a spectacular funeral pyre. The same scenes played out at Titan's Rest and New Horizon. Mining stations exploded in showers of metal and fire. Manufacturing centers collapsed as their reactors overloaded. Research facilities containing decades of scientific work were reduced to smoking craters. The Korthak weapons were designed for complete destruction, leaving no infrastructure intact and no population alive. They wanted to send a message that would be heard across the galaxy. Captain Chen's final transmission reached Earth 3 days later after traveling through subspace relays and emergency channels. Her voice was barely audible over the static, broken by explosions and interference. She reported the arrival of unknown alien vessels, the complete destruction of Aurora Prime, and the deaths of 60,000 innocent people. The transmission, cut off as another energy beam found its target, silencing the last human voice in the system. The Korthak fleet departed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind 3 dead worlds and nearly 200,000 human casualties. General Vextar reviewed the after-action reports with satisfaction. The operation had been completed ahead of schedule with minimal losses. The human colonies were completely destroyed, their populations eliminated, and their infrastructure reduced to rubble. Surely now the humans would understand the price of unchecked expansion. Emperor Thexhan approved the broadcast of a formal warning to all human worlds. The message was clear and direct. Humanity had expanded too far and too fast. The destruction of Aurora Prime, Titan's Rest and New Horizon was a gentle reminder of the consequences of ignoring galactic order. Further expansion would result in further consequences. The humans should withdraw to their core worlds and be grateful for the Korthak Empire's mercy. The aliens believed they had delivered a decisive blow to human morale and expansion. They expected fear, retreat, and submission. They anticipated that humanity would pull back from the outer rim, abandon their colonial ambitions, and accept their place as a minor species in the galactic community. They had successfully dealt with dozens of emerging civilizations using exactly these tactics. The humans would be no different. But the Korthak Empire had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human nature. They had studied human agriculture, human trade, and human diplomacy. They had observed human patience, human cooperation, and human willingness to coexist peacefully with other species. What they had failed to understand was that these traits were not signs of weakness. They were choices made by a species that remembered its own violent past and preferred to avoid repeating it. The dragons had been sleeping for generations, content to farm and build and explore. But the Korthak Empire had just struck at the heart of everything humans held dear. They had murdered children in schools, parents in their homes, and workers in their fields. They had destroyed the fruits of decades of labor and the hopes of entire generations. They had awakened something that had been dormant for so long that even the humans themselves had forgotten its terrible power. The news of the colony massacres reached Earth on a Tuesday morning. Within hours, every human world in the galaxy knew what had happened. The images were burned into collective memory: the smoking ruins of peaceful settlements, the wreckage of civilian transports, the cold efficiency of alien genocide. Humanity looked at the destruction and remembered what they had once been before they learned to love peace more than war. The dragons were waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why they had been feared. The Dragon Awakens President James Harrison stood before the emergency session of the United Earth Assembly, his face carved from stone as he addressed representatives from every human world. The great hall was silent except for the sound of quiet weeping from those who had lost family in the colonies. Behind him, massive screens showed the aftermath of the Korthak attack. Empty spaces where thriving cities had once stood, twisted metal where dreams had been built, and mass graves where children had played just days before. Admiral Victoria Kane sat in the front row, her weathered hands clenched into fists. She had served in the Human Defense Forces for 35 years, fighting pirates and protecting trade routes. But those had been clean wars against military targets. What the Korthak had done was something else entirely. They had committed genocide against farmers and teachers, against grandparents and newborn babies. They had crossed a line that humanity had spent centuries learning not to cross. The president's voice echoed through the hall as he spoke words that would reshape the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 days ago, the Korthak Empire murdered nearly 200,000 of our people. They targeted schools, hospitals, and homes. They killed children in their classrooms and parents at their dinner tables. They did this without warning, without provocation, and without mercy. They have awakened something they do not understand. Dr. Alexei Petrov watched the speech from his laboratory deep within the Martian research complex. For 15 years, he had been developing theoretical weapons that the government had deemed too dangerous to build, projects that could crack planets, ignite atmospheres, and turn star systems into graveyards. The politicians had always told him that such weapons were unnecessary in a civilized galaxy. Today, they were asking him to make them real. The transformation of human civilization began within hours of the president's speech. Every shipyard in human space received new orders and unlimited funding. Factories that had been producing agricultural equipment began manufacturing plasma cannons. Mining operations shifted to extracting materials for armor plating and reactor cores. The greatest industrial mobilization in human history was underway, and it had only one purpose: war. Captain Tom Mitchell stood before a room full of Special Forces operators, the elite soldiers that humanity kept hidden from the rest of the galaxy. For generations, they had worked in the shadows, handling threats that the public never knew existed. Now they were being called into the light for the first time since the colonial wars. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice quiet but filled with deadly promise, "we're going hunting." The recruitment centers across human space were overwhelmed by volunteers. Young people who had never considered military service stood in line for hours to enlist. Veterans of the colonial conflicts came out of retirement, their eyes burning with remembered skills. Entire families volunteered together, determined to serve in whatever capacity they could. The Korthak had wanted to frighten humanity into submission. Instead, they had united every human world in a desire for justice. Admiral Kane received her new orders directly from the president. She was to take command of the largest military force in human history and use it to teach the Korthak Empire the consequences of genocide. Unlimited authority, unlimited resources, and unlimited permission to do whatever was necessary to protect humanity. She accepted the responsibility with grim determination, knowing that she was about to become the architect of alien nightmares. The weapons Dr. Petrov had kept locked away began rolling off assembly lines in secret facilities across the solar system. Stellar torpedo swarms that could overwhelm any defense system, kinetic bombardment platforms that could shatter continents, fusion mines that could turn entire sectors of space into death traps, and deep in the most classified research facility on Luna, something that had never been built before, a weapon that could make stars themselves into instruments of war. Emperor Thexhan received the first reports of human military buildup with dismissive amusement. Intelligence suggested that the humans were constructing perhaps a few hundred ships, hardly enough to threaten the mighty Korthak Empire. Their industrial capacity was impressive for such a young species, but they lacked the military tradition and warrior culture necessary for serious warfare. The Empire had been fighting wars for millennia while humans had been growing vegetables. General Vextar was less confident than his emperor. The intelligence reports kept growing worse with each passing day. Human ship construction had exceeded all estimates, their recruitment numbers were impossible, and their industrial output was approaching the levels of the Empire itself. Perhaps the humans were more dangerous than initially assessed. He recommended reinforcing border defenses and preparing for a longer conflict than originally planned. The Korthak Empire had made their plans based on their experience with other emerging species. A show of force, a demonstration of consequences, and the newcomers would accept their subordinate position in the galactic order. But humanity was not like the other species they had encountered. Humans had evolved on a death world, fighting for survival against predators, disease, and environmental catastrophe. They had learned to work together because isolation meant extinction. And they had never forgotten that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be prepared for war. 6 months after the colony attacks, the first human war fleet departed Earth. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UHS Retribution, watching as 2,000 warships formed into battle formation around her. It was the largest fleet in recorded galactic history, crewed by 3 million volunteers who had sworn an oath to remember Aurora Prime, Titan's Rest, and New Horizon. The ships were new, their weapons untested in combat, but their crews burned with righteous fury. The first target was the Korthak military installation at Xerion Prime, a heavily fortified system that controlled 3 sectors and housed 50,000 enemy soldiers. Intelligence suggested it was one of the Empire's most secure positions, protected by orbital defense platforms and a permanent fleet of 300 warships. Admiral Kane chose it specifically because the Korthak would never expect humans to attack such a strong position. They were about to learn that humanity no longer cared about acceptable losses. The battle lasted 4 hours and ended with the complete destruction of Xerion Prime. The human attack was unlike anything the Korthak had ever encountered. Instead of the traditional single-fleet engagement they expected, the humans came from 6 different directions simultaneously. They deployed weapons that violated every known principle of civilized warfare, turning the system's own asteroid belt into a kinetic bombardment swarm that cracked the planet's crust. Captain Mitchell led his special forces in boarding actions against the surviving Korthak ships. The alien crews discovered that humans had been hiding their true capabilities for generations. The soldiers who boarded their vessels were faster, stronger, and more ruthless than any warrior race in the galaxy. They fought with a cold precision that spoke of species-level experience with violence as if war was their natural state rather than an aberration. News of Xerion Prime's destruction reached the Korthak capital within days, and Emperor Thexhan realized that his empire faced an unprecedented threat. The humans had not retreated or sued for peace as expected. They had responded to the destruction of 3 colonies by annihilating an entire military sector. Intelligence reports suggested that more human fleets were already moving toward other imperial positions. This was not the behavior of farmers and merchants. This was the response of a warrior species that had been pretending to be peaceful. Dr. Y. Petrov's most secret project reached completion just as the second wave of human attacks began. Deep in the heart of the Korthak Empire, a star that had burned steadily for billions of years suddenly flared brighter. The increase was barely noticeable at first, but stellar observers across the galaxy watched in horror as they realized what was happening. The humans had found a way to accelerate stellar evolution, turning the Korthak sun into a weapon pointed at their own homeworld. The siege of the Korthak capital lasted 3 weeks. Admiral Kane's fleet surrounded the system with a wall of ships and weapons that nothing could penetrate. They broadcast a simple message on all frequencies: surrender unconditionally or watch your star consume your world. The humans had become something that the galaxy had never seen before. They had transformed themselves into the ultimate predator, capable of using the fundamental forces of the universe as instruments of war. Emperor Thexhan faced a choice that no Korthak ruler had ever confronted. His empire was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought without honor, without mercy, and without the traditional constraints of civilized warfare. Human fleets were advancing on a dozen fronts, their weapons turning imperial worlds into charnel houses. The species that had seemed so harmless just months before had revealed themselves as the most dangerous force in the galaxy. General Vextar's final report to his emperor was brief and hopeless. The Korthak military had been designed to fight other civilized species that followed established rules of engagement. The humans ignored every convention of warfare, treated civilian targets as legitimate military objectives, and seemed willing to accept any level of casualties to achieve their goals. They were not just winning the war, they were rewriting the very definition of what war meant in the Galactic Age. The surrender came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after the attacks on the human colonies. Emperor Thexhan himself appeared, before Admiral Kane aboard the UHS Retribution, offering the unconditional capitulation of the entire Korthak Empire. The once mighty alien ruler knelt before a human woman half his age, begging for mercy that his own species had refused to show. The dragons had awakened and they had remembered how to breathe fire. Admiral Kane accepted the surrender with cold satisfaction, but her terms were non-negotiable. The Korthak Empire would be dissolved, its military disbanded, and its leaders tried for genocide. The alien species would be relocated to reservation worlds under human supervision. Their expansion permanently ended. Most importantly, the galaxy would know what happened to civilizations that chose to murder human children. President Harrison's final speech was broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy, a message that would be remembered for generations. To any species that might consider humanity an easy target, he said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible certainty. Remember what happened to the Korthak Empire. We are farmers and teachers, builders and dreamers. We prefer peace to war, cooperation to conflict. But we are also the children of Earth, descendants of the only species to survive on a world that tried to kill us every single day. The galaxy learned a new truth that year. Humanity's love of peace was not weakness but choice. Their willingness to coexist was not submission but preference, and their patience was not infinite. The Korthak Empire had discovered that when you strike at humanity's heart, you do not wound the dragon, you wake it up. And once awakened, the dragon remembers why the galaxy once trembled at the mention of Earth. The stars themselves bore witness to humanity's transformation. Peaceful farmers had become unstoppable warriors, gentle teachers had become ruthless strategists, and loving parents had become the architects of alien extinction. The fire that the Korthak had lit by bombing human colonies could not be stopped, contained or reasoned with. It would burn until justice was complete and the galaxy understood that some lines should never be crossed. The dragons were awake, and they would never sleep again.